Hello, this is Top Class with me, Duncan Crawford, where we're discussing the importance of teacher knowledge. What do teachers need to know to teach effectively and keep students engaged, motivated, and learning at a high level? It's a pertinent question, particularly as a new OECD report has found big differences in the level of general pedagogical knowledge that teachers possess in some countries. The OECD's Teacher Knowledge Survey looked at how well teachers understand learning itself and where the gaps are. Can they explain ideas clearly, anticipate misconceptions, and create the conditions where every student can succeed? These abilities matter because they are closely linked to student outcomes. So what can be done to better support teachers to develop this kind of specialised teaching knowledge? Well, I'm joined by two experts who are going to help me answer that question and many others. Linda Darling-Hammond, Chief Knowledge Officer at the Learning Policy Institute, a non-profit research organisation in the US. She is also president of the State Board of Education in California. She worked closely with the Obama and Biden administrations on education policy back in the day and is the author of more than 500 publications, 500, including award-winning books such as The Right to Learn and The Flat World in Education. Linda Darling-Hammond, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us, and also joining us on the podcast, not one, but two guests. I'm glad to say I'm also joined by Heewoon Bae, an OECD policy analyst who was one of the main authors of the OECD's Teacher Knowledge Survey, which we are discussing today. Before joining the OECD, she was also a history teacher at secondary schools in England and France. Thank you so much for joining us, Heewoon.
I'm very excited to be here as well.
Excellent. We're all excited and ready to go. So listen, to begin with, so people understand what we're talking about, let's talk about the importance of teacher quality and general pedagogical knowledge. What does that actually mean in practice? Heewoon Bae, as you've written a report about this, maybe it's best to come to you first.
So general pedagogical knowledge is the specialized knowledge of teachers for creating an effective teaching and learning environment for all students, and that is regardless of their subject matter. So whether you're a history teacher or a maths teacher, this is the knowledge that you have and that helps you to teach effectively. And this covers three general areas of teaching. So that is instruction, kind of teaching methods, and how to plan a lesson, how to manage behavior, how students learn, so theories of learning, how memory works, and how students are motivated. And the third core part is knowledge of assessment. How do you assess students? What are the different kinds of assessments that you can use? How can you use the data that comes out of assessments? And so the report that we wrote recently about the Teacher Knowledge Survey. This was an exciting moment for us in the team, as it was the first time we assessed teachers' general pedagogical knowledge in 8 countries that were part of TALIS, the Teaching and Learning International Survey.
Understood. And Linda Darling-Hammond, if I can bring you in, what is teacher general pedagogical knowledge for you? Is it exactly the same? And if yes, how central is that to student success?
Well, I'll just build on Heewoon's initial definition. It's the body of knowledge about how people learn, how they develop. We also now have a lot of knowledge from neuroscience about how the brain operates, how neural connections are formed, which actually create our intelligences, and they continue to evolve throughout life. So children's brains are evolving based on the relationships and the experiences that they're having in school. It's also what we've learned about effective teaching methods. There's a lot of research about what actually works in the classroom. Of course, those things are tied to how people learn most effectively. Interestingly, there are a lot of practices in many schools that are at odds with how people learn, and that we now, know a lot more about how to, support in the right ways. So it's how people learn, how to teach them effectively, and what we know from research about that. And then, as Heewoon said, it's also how to both assess learning in ways that give you good information about the thinking of students, as well as whether they have a right or wrong answer, and then what to do with that information in planning to actually meet their needs.
Heewoon, when you've got these descriptions of all these things which teachers should have, if they have high general pedagogical knowledge, the new report which you were involved in, the Teacher Knowledge Survey, it found that there are actually big variations in the levels of knowledge that teachers have. So tell us about the survey and what were the big stories for you coming out of the data.
So one of the most important findings from the Teacher Knowledge Survey is that this more objective measure of part of teachers' professional competence is related to what teachers do and student outcomes. So we see that from teachers that have higher general pedagogical knowledge, they tend to spend more time on actual teaching and learning by often saving time on keeping order in the classroom or administrative tasks. And we can see when we compare these results from the Teacher Knowledge Survey to student performance in the OECD PISA assessment, that in countries where teachers have higher pedagogical knowledge, students generally tend to achieve better also in mathematics and reading. So there is a link between, we can see this link between pedagogical knowledge, what teachers do, and student outcomes. And as you mentioned, we also found that there is a lot of variation. A lot of this variation is happening within countries, although there are also some differences between countries. If you look at the US, for example, the top quarter of students score more highly than the top quarter of other participating countries, but their bottom 10% is far lower performing than the bottom 10% of other countries. So there is a huge amount of variation there. And one of the key questions then is why? Why do some teachers have more pedagogical knowledge than others? And also, are these teachers equally allocated in between schools?
Well, I'm glad you brought up that example. It's almost as if it was planned that we have a guest from the US here who's an expert in this area. Why, Linda Darling-Hammond, are these huge variations seen in the US in regards to general teacher knowledge?
This is not unique to the US, but the US is almost always widely variable because we have great inequalities in the way that we treat education in this country across states. In the United States, there have been shortages of teachers for a long time. Teachers are not well compensated relative to other professions. And when we have shortages, a lot of states allow people to enter teaching without any preparation. So the variation has a lot to do with what kind of preparation you've got. If you've never had a chance to learn about learning and teaching, you're not likely to know very much. And so we have a revolving door of people who come in to fill shortage positions who have not been trained in many states, not in all states, but it is, again, variable within the country. And they will often, almost always, be in the highest need schools, which have the greatest proportions of low-income students, new immigrant students. So we have this, battle in the U.S. around inequality. As I say, some states are really winning that battle. Others have not put the policies in place to equalize access to training, resources for salaries, and all the other things that go into the teaching force.
So what are some places in the US doing better than others to train teachers up to ensure they have better general pedagogical knowledge?
Well, typically, the New England states have put more resources into training and teaching and salaries and all of the things that support teaching, although there are some other states that have followed suit. Typically in those states, first of all, there are resources to become prepared. In many countries around the world, if you think of like places like Finland and Singapore and others, teachers are trained for free. They don't have to pay to go to college, and they get a stipend or a salary while they're training in some places. In other places, there are, these gaps in access, and people can't afford to buy have the tuition payments, or they may not have access geographically to teacher education. But in the places that do, the salaries are more comparable. There are scholarships for attending teacher education. The education programs are accredited and supported to provide a high quality of both coursework and clinical work. The clinical work is in a growing number of places a full-year teacher residency under the wing of a master teacher, while there's also coursework going on to teach them about how students learn and how to teach them. And in those places, you'll see not only more equity in knowledge and skills, but also more equity in student outcomes.
So Heewoon nodding along to a lot of the things you were saying there. Heewoon, how much of that tallies what Linda just said with the findings in the survey? And for you, what separates the most effective teacher preparation programs to those which are weaker ones?
It's interesting because we wondered actually whether we would see significant differences between the pedagogical knowledge of teachers in more advantaged schools and less advantaged schools. From within our own survey, these differences were often statistically not significant, although they were in South Africa, where we tended to find that teachers in more disadvantaged schools had less pedagogical knowledge, pointing out a key area for policy to focus on there. Although that's not to say that there are not other areas of teachers' professional competence which are potentially that teachers may struggle with in disadvantaged schools. In the US, it's just we don't see that part of the findings in our study.
Can I interject just to say that part of the challenge is whether people get access to any teacher education program. So there are some differentials that you might find between programs, depending on how a country or state manages its quality control, its accreditation processes, or whatever. But in many countries, the biggest differential is that there are large numbers of teachers who don't even get access to any teacher education. So I think that's the more fundamental problem. And then you can layer on the additional differentials.
Absolutely. I really agree with you here, Linda. We can see there are huge structural differences in the ways that teachers enter the profession. If we look at, for example, the countries that participated in the Teacher Knowledge Survey, in countries like Poland and Portugal, more than 90% of teachers have a kind of regular initial teacher training where they attend courses that combine pedagogical training with knowledge of their subject. Whereas this is much less common in countries like South Africa or Saudi Arabia. Actually, in Saudi Arabia, around half of teachers have, as their initial qualifications, got subject-specific education only. So they haven't had pedagogical training as part of that. So if we're thinking about pedagogical knowledge as a core competence for teachers, and teachers entering the profession have not had any training in that, then that's a part of the issue.
So if that is part of the issue, once teachers are in the classroom, what kinds of professional development are most effective at strengthening teachers' general pedagogical knowledge? Linda?
I would say both in pre-service preparation, initial teacher education, and in the in-service professional development, being able to see an effective teacher teach, to be, part of it could be the student teaching that you do in pre-service, or it could be a mentor or coach in service, where you get to understand how the classroom operates, how an effective teacher does these things. It's very important. You can have workshops and you can have courses, but you can't learn to teach really from just hearing about it or reading about it. You need also to see it and talk with other teachers about it. In pre-service preparation, the strongest models that we're emerging in the United States are what we call teacher residencies, where the district and the teacher education program work together to bring in the candidates. The clinical work is tied to the coursework. They're in a classroom for a full year with a mentor teacher is one of the experts in that district, not just any classroom, but one of the most expert teachers. And then all of that is integrated in a coherent way around the practice of teaching. For those ongoing professional development, having a team with whom you plan. Collaborating with other teachers around curriculum development is very important. And then having a coach or a mentor who can then not only watch you teach, but also illustrate and model what good teaching practices look like. All of those are important ways for learning in both pre and in service.
We see this in the results of the not the teacher knowledge survey, but if we look at the core TALIS survey, which was also run in 55 education systems, that actually, when you ask teachers what are the important characteristics of professional learning for you, the thing that is most commonly reported as being important are opportunities to practice and apply new ideas and knowledge. So they need to be able to see the new concept or a theory and how that's going to work in their classroom. And absolutely, we also see in TALIS the importance of having mentoring, this exchange of novice teachers with experienced teachers. Novice teachers who have an assigned mentor are more likely to report that they fulfill a range of lesson aims, from managing classroom behavior to supporting students with their social emotional development. But we also see that this is an area in which not all novice teachers are receiving the same amounts of support around the world. On average, only about 1 in 4 novice teachers has an assigned mentor, but this is ranging from 5% in Montenegro to 80% in Shanghai.
The other thing I want to point out, just to add to that about the previous TALIS surveys, is that collaboration comes out as a huge desire, a desiderata for teachers. And some of the analyses found that teacher efficacy improves significantly with the amounts and types of collaboration teachers have with other teachers. And efficacy is then related as well in the literature to effectiveness. So finding ways to learn from other teachers and plan with and collaborate with is also a big piece of it. We're basically pushing back on old models of teaching, in which the idea was that you just needed your content knowledge, and then you would go into an Ed Crate classroom and be an individual practitioner who did your thing all by yourself. And that was kind of the norm in the way people thought about teaching for a very long time. And we now know, of course, that both teachers need much more than content knowledge. In fact, there was a study in the United States that found that if math teachers had too much math without enough pedagogy, they were less effective because they couldn't understand what students needed to learn. It was like in their head. And a lot of teachers, were in the olden days raised to think that you just tell students things. You write the equation on the board, you tell them what it is, they copy it down, somehow they magically learn it. And knowing something yourself can sometimes, if you don't know pedagogy, you don't know how to explain it to someone else, how to make it visible, transparent, how to give them tasks that will allow them to try it out with the right level of difficulty, etc. You can actually fail as a teacher, even if you have the content knowledge. So all of these things are, sort of being built into our understandings of and support for teaching. But there's still places where the old ideas are in place.
How should policymakers go about changing this? Because a common complaint from lots of teachers is that they're overworked, these huge workloads. So how can policymakers, school leaders support the development of teachers' general pedagogical knowledge without overloading them further?
Take advantage of initial teacher education. It is penny wise and pound foolish to think that you should bring people into the profession without that opportunity to learn and then try to make up for it later. It's very, very difficult to do. So the first thing is create strong preparation, make sure people get access to it. We're doing a lot of these kinds of policies in California right now to make sure that the financial supports are there, that the programs are high quality, that students will know what they need to know when they come out, then ensure that they have that beginning year of mentoring so that they're able to put it into practice, and then throughout the career, or organize the school so that collaboration with other teachers is possible. In many countries, we see on TALIS data that on average in the world, teachers teach about 19 hours a week with kids, and the rest of the time is with other adults and, doing the other tasks of teaching. But in the United States, we have less collaboration time than almost any other country. Places like Singapore and Shanghai have more. And then the other countries fall in between. And that's where you get this complaint that I'm overloaded and can't find time to learn or do my job, is in the countries that haven't really organized schools to allow for that collaboration time. And that's a matter of thinking about how do we staff the schools, reducing unnecessary bureaucracy, not paying more of the money on the, administrative apparatuses and more on teachers, and then organizing their time in ways that allow for that learning.
And Heewoon Bae, you've studied high-performing systems around the world. What are they doing differently when it comes to developing teachers' expertise? Are they focusing more on initial teacher training?
Sorry, could I just come in and add to some of the things that Linda mentioned? What we see in the TALIS 2024 data is absolutely the greatest barriers that teachers report to participating in professional development is a lack of time and conflicts with work schedules. But something that I find also concerning is that 46% so nearly half of teachers say that a barrier to professional learning is no incentives to participate. And a third of teachers also say that they didn't have any relevant learning that was offered, which kind of suggests that even if they did have the time, then they might not be motivated to do the professional learning that is on offer. And if we look at our data on the impact of the professional learning that teachers are actually doing, we see that on average, only 55% of teachers say that the professional learning that they participated in led to a positive change in their teaching. So when we're thinking about how we can improve the professional learning that's on offer, there also needs to be a review of what teachers are currently doing. Is it tied to what they need? And here, I think, where teachers can have a voice in the kind of priorities, areas of development for professional learning, that can lead to positive change.
I find it a bit surprising that the education profession, you have professional development where the teaching isn't considered very good when you'd imagine teachers are good at it. And you'd also imagine
not always teachers giving the professional development. That's part of the
also
problem.
Teachers are more critical students because they know what good teaching looks like.
Well, okay, but on that point, if they're critical students, they know what good teaching looks like. Surely they should be good learners who are motivated to learn as well. So on the two sides of the coin, I find it a bit surprising. Why do you think that is?
It's because bureaucracies quite often, plan professional development as workshops that teachers are sent out to sit and get, information from PowerPoint slides. That is not how people learn to teach. And so it's, and typically those are, quote, experts flown in to give a lecture rather than job embedded professional development. We did a study at LPI some years ago, reviewing all the studies that had found, rigorous studies that had found that teachers' practice changed and student outcomes changed as a result of certain kinds of professional development. And if anybody wants to find it, it's called Effective Teacher Professional Development on the Learning Policy Institute website. And there were 7 features that were across all of the studies that and programs that had this outcome. They were content based on and the content that the teachers were teaching. They were collaborative. Teachers were working with each other. They were active learning, inquiry-based. Teachers were designing curriculum units or, developing materials or whatever the task was that they needed. They were sufficiently long in duration to allow you to develop the skills and the knowledge that was being communicated. And so and they involve mentoring and coaching. We've mentioned a lot of these things in this webinar. So there are forms of professional learning that are very effective and that teachers value. And we have to be sure that departments of education, ministries of education, administrations really understand how to design that as opposed to mandating something that is poorly designed to enable teachers to get what they need and use it in an applied way.
Talking about the design of these programs, given that we're looking at this rapidly changing world with digitalization, new technologies, and of course, artificial intelligence, which everyone can't stop talking about, and the possible implications, how should teacher knowledge evolve in response to us now living in an AI potentially dominated world?
Well, as with other digital tools and resources that have been around for many years, like the internet, AI, and new technologies, they have the potential to interact with many different aspects of general pedagogy, in terms of instruction, in terms of lesson planning, for example. How can teachers use AI to alleviate some of their workload? In terms of student learning, how can the use of AI affect students' motivations to learn? How can or should teachers adapt assessments to check, for example, that students haven't used AI? Or if they wanted to assess if they've used AI safely and critically, how they can make an assessment like that as well.
Does AI make it harder to be a teacher in that case, or easier, Linda Darling-Hammond?
Oh, it's such a wide range of things that AI can do. There's one version of AI in which teachers use AI to design the assignment and give it to students who use AI to complete the assignment, who give it back to the teacher who uses AI to grade the assignment. And the only participant in the whole process is the AI itself. So, I mean, that's what people worry about, is that you could cut learning, human learning, out of the equation.
Sorry, just to interrupt very briefly. On that study, is there any evidence that that actually leads to real learning gains for the students?
That was not a study. That is a caricature. However, I think it is probably going on in some places, and it is the fear that motivates, a lot of folks around this question of AI. But one of the things that we're seeing is that teachers need to, a lot of schooling has been sort of transmission oriented, like teacher has information, gives it to the student writes it down, studies it, gives it back on a test. It's been very, information transmission oriented. Really, with AI, that is like really not, needs to recede as a goal of education. And the nature of the work has to be much more critical, much more, as Heewoon said, it has to be much more analytic, much more problem solving, much more performance and practice based. When kids are solving real problems in project-based learning, and they and AI is structured as a resource, but then there's a lot of the work that's really about the analysis, the critical use of the knowledge, the vetting of it, the understanding how to figure out when AI is wrong, and when it is giving you bad information and evaluating that. That's what teaching has to now aim for, and what students need to be doing if we're going to be using AI to actually advance knowledge and skills. And so it's a very different kind of teaching than some teachers have been asked to do in the past. I would say over the last 30 years, there's been a move across the world to change curriculum to focus more on problem solving and critical thinking and applied learning. But it has been in battle with actually other systems that are still reinforcing the old, sit and get, memorize the knowledge, spit it back on the examination, et cetera. So we've got a big job in front of us, not just about how teachers use AI, but about how we think about the entire curriculum that's meaningful in schools for this, next era in humankind.
Given you're saying how much needs to change, I mean, how rapidly, in all honesty, do you think systems will change? Because education systems are notoriously hard to change, notoriously slow to change. AI is here and now being used by students and teachers in the classroom. And should the initial teacher training programs, which you've said are so important, do they need to rapidly change so that they are taking into account AI for the next generation of teachers coming in?
Well, it needs to not just be initial teacher training, but also the continuing professional development, because this is not just something that is affecting teachers coming into the profession, but all the teachers who have already been trained. So we need to have that flexibility and that rapid response. What we found in the TALIS 2024 survey is that when it was taken in 2024, about a third of teachers were using AI, and it was the similar share that had received training in it, although it was extremely varied between countries. 9% of teachers in France said they had received training in it versus 76% in Singapore. But if you see these countries where there are a lot of teachers who have received training, you can see that there are the capabilities to be more nimble. And that's really quite impressive. And the reality is that the technology is out there, the students are using it. So even if you say don't agree with it, or you don't feel ready for it, you need to be able to help these students who are going to be using it. And you sort of questioned whether governments, which can be very slow, can respond quickly. I find it quite exciting. I was reading there's an education policy perspective paper on teacher policies to support the use of digital resources in the classroom. And they were looking at Estonia. They have this digital competences framework that they have drawn up, which looks at the kinds of competencies that teachers need. And this is reviewed on a monthly basis by a task force, which consults with an advisory board with experts from schools and universities. So there's this collaborative element, but it's also kept up to date for current needs.
That is such a great example of the speed with which this is all happening and needs to be addressed. I wrote it down as you were explaining it. And meanwhile, we've got this kind of polarization in the United States and in some other countries, where there are people saying no screens in classrooms. We're going to take away not only the cell phones, but the other screens. Some of the debate and policy is around early learners, but some of it is beyond the early learning space. So we've got these competing ideas about education that are a challenge. I would just add to the complexity that some of this is around teachers and their training, but remember that in many countries, teaching is highly regulated by systems of curriculum, by testing systems, especially true in the United States, where annual testing has a lot of high stakes attached to it. And when those features and others that hold the school in place in the way that it was designed many years ago don't change, it's very hard to say teachers themselves should change the way in which students are learning. So whole systems really have to tackle this and think much more ambitiously about what education should be, what kids should be learning, how we should be assessing it. And we hear this from teachers all over the world.
On the subject of ambitious policy changes, as we are relatively low on time, if you could change one education policy tomorrow with a click of your fingers to improve general pedagogical knowledge of teachers, what would it be? Linda and Heewoon, whoever wants to go first.
I would invest deeply in initial teacher education. And one well-known story about that is Finland, which in 1970 was not considered a well-educated country. Only 10% of Finns had graduated from high school. There was a massive change in their education system, and they invested greatly in initial teacher education, with all teachers getting the 5-year training, a master's degree, focused on research about learning, focused on the science of learning and development, focused on clinical work with model schools in which you could see the practices that you're trying to learn. And when PISA first started in 2000, everyone was shocked that Finland was the top achieving country in the world because it had come such a long way. And, the investments in initial teacher education in a very ambitious and serious form did a lot of that work to enable schools to be very, very different than they've been.
And Heewoon, if you're forced to choose one thing to change by the click of your fingers tomorrow, what would it be?
I don't want to repeat, but the initial teacher training is, of course, extremely important. If you have teachers who are able to enter the profession without any training in pedagogy, how can you expect them to have sufficient general pedagogical knowledge to guide them in their teaching, to help them understand how students learn, to help them know how to assess their students in the most appropriate way? You can have different pathways into teaching, right? So it could be the case that you have teachers who have done subject-specific studies. For example, in Poland, you might have done your bachelor's and your master's in the subject that you then decide that you want to teach. But all teachers are required to have a year-long program of pedagogical training. So no matter what your initial qualifications are, then there is this route that supports your key competence as a teacher and to develop that aspect. So I would say yes, the initial teacher training, but also having the requirements to allow for different routes into the profession.
Okay, thank you so much to both of you and to any policymakers listening. You heard it here. Ideas to improve the general pedagogical knowledge of your teachers. Just look at the OECD Teacher Knowledge Survey for some answers, but you heard a lot of them here on the podcast as well. Thank you to my two guests today, Linda Darling-Hammond, Chief Knowledge Officer at the Learning Policy Institute, and Heewoon Bae, OECD Policy Analyst and one of the main authors of the OECD's Teacher Knowledge Survey. I hope this has helped anyone listening. If you like this podcast, then please subscribe, like, comment, wherever you do get your podcasts, and we'll be back with another episode of Top Class soon. All the best.